The baby was 11 days old when Clara Whitfield walked into the most expensive law firm in Manhattan, carrying him against her chest. She had chosen that morning carefully, not because she was dramatic, not because she wanted a scene, but because her lawyer had told her that Wednesday at 10 was the only slot available before the holiday recess, and Clara had learned, over the past 3 years of marriage to Derek Whitfield, that waiting was always more painful than whatever came next. So she had dressed with quiet intention, a cream blouse she hadn't worn since before the pregnancy, dark slacks that still didn't button all the way, and a navy coat that covered both. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes, which were a shade of green that people sometimes stopped to comment on, were steady and clear. Only someone who knew her well, really well, would have noticed the slight tremor in her right hand as she pressed the elevator button for the 14th floor. Nobody in that building knew her that well anymore. The baby. She had named him Miles, a name Derek had never agreed to or disagreed with, because Derek had not been present for most of the decisions of the past 8 months, was wrapped tightly against her in a soft grey carrier. He was asleep, his small mouth slightly open, his fingers curled into loose fists beside his face. Clara had timed the feeding for 40 minutes before the appointment. She had learned, in 11 days, to plan everything around the short windows of calm. She had learned a great many things in 11 days that she hadn't expected to learn so soon. The elevator opened onto a reception area that was aggressively serene. White marble floors, low leather furniture, a single orchid on a glass table. A receptionist with perfect posture looked up with the kind of practiced smile that communicated nothing. "Clara Whitfield," Clara said. 10 o'clock with Mr. Hargrove." Of course. The woman's eyes dropped just briefly to the baby. "I'll let him know you've arrived." Clara sat in one of the low chairs and adjusted the carrier. Miles shifted but didn't wake. She kept her gaze on the orchid. She didn't allow herself to think about Derek yet. That was a discipline she had been practicing for months, the way an athlete practices a specific movement until it becomes automatic. Think about the next hour. Think about what needs to happen. Don't think about the way it was supposed to be. She had married Derek Whitfield 3 years ago in a small ceremony in Connecticut, had a vineyard his family had owned for generations. She had been 28. He had been 34. She had been in love with him in the particular way you love someone who seems at first to be exactly what you needed. Steady, ambitious, attentive in the precise moments when attention matters. She had not known then that attentiveness could be a strategy rather than a character trait. She had learned that later. The first year was good. The second year, Derek's company, a private equity firm that had been growing steadily since he'd taken it over from his father, made a series of acquisitions that pushed its valuation past $800 million. Clara had watched her husband transform with the money. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like watching a photograph develop in reverse, the colors slowly washing out until what remained was something flatter and harder than what had been there before. He traveled more. He called less. When he was home, he was present in body only, his attention always elsewhere, always on a phone or a laptop or a conversation she wasn't part of. She had tried. She wanted that on record somewhere, even if only in her own memory. She had tried couples counseling, which Derek attended twice and then declared useless. She had tried adjusting her own schedule, her own expectations, her own definition of what a marriage could look like. She had tried honesty, sitting across from him at the kitchen table of their Upper West Side apartment, and saying plainly that she was losing him, and she didn't know how to stop it. He had looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite guilt, and said he was sorry she felt that way. 3 months later, she discovered he had been seeing someone else. She hadn't confronted him immediately. That surprised even her. She had always thought of herself as direct, as someone who handled things rather than avoided them. But the discovery had knocked something loose in her, some foundational certainty about her own perceptions, and she needed time to reassemble before she could speak. She had also by then just discovered she was pregnant. She hadn't told Derek about the pregnancy, not at first. She needed to understand what she was going to do. Not about the baby, that decision came quickly and clearly, but about the marriage, about the man, about the next chapter of a life she was going to have to rebuild from whatever remained. She had consulted a lawyer in private. she had begun, quietly, to prepare. And then the weeks had passed, and her body had changed, and she had made peace with the fact that she was going to do this alone, and still she hadn't told him. She wore loose clothes. She worked from home more often. When Derek was in town, which was rare enough by then, they occupied the apartment like two people sharing a waiting room, polite and distant and careful. It was only when she was 7 months along that he noticed. They had been in the kitchen, and she had reached across the counter for something, and her shirt had pulled tight across her stomach, and Derek had looked up from his phone and gone very still. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. He didn't say anything else for a long moment. Then, "How long?" 7 months. She watched something move across his face that she couldn't entirely read. Shock, certainly. And beneath it something more complicated. "Why didn't you—" "Because I needed to handle things in the right order," she said. "And I needed to do it without asking you for anything." He had tried, in the weeks that followed, to reinsert himself. He had shown up suddenly attentive, suddenly present, with the particular energy of a man who realizes he may have miscalculated. Clara had been kind but clear. She had not needed his presence then, and she didn't need it now. What she needed was a clean and fair resolution to a marriage that had ended before it officially ended, so that she could give her son a stable foundation. She had not, however, anticipated what she found when she stepped through the glass door of the conference room. Her lawyer, Hargrove, was already at the table. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of measured expression that came from decades of managing other people's worst days. Across from him sat Derek's lawyer, a younger man named Philip, who Clara had met once before and found brittle in the way insecure people often are. And next to Philip, not sitting at the lawyer's side, not waiting in a separate area, but right there, in the room, at the conference table with a glass of water in front of her, and her long legs crossed and a small controlled smile on her face, was Renata Collins. Clara had seen photographs of Renata. She had not expected to see her here. Derek himself sat at the head of the table, in the chair that placed him at maximum distance from where Clara would sit. He was wearing a charcoal suit. He looked, as he always looked, composed, polished and closed off, like a building with all its curtains drawn. He was looking at his phone when Clara walked in. He looked up. His eyes went to her face first, then down, to the carrier, to Miles, still asleep, his small chest rising and falling with the perfect regularity of the newly born. Derek Whitfield, who had negotiated the purchase of 4 companies in the last 18 months without visibly breaking a sweat, went completely, utterly still. Renata's smile didn't disappear so much as it became confused. She looked at Derek. Derek didn't look back at her. His eyes were fixed on the baby with an expression Clara had never seen on his face before, and she had known this man for 5 years, had studied him the way you study someone you love, had catalogued every variation of his expressions. She had never seen him look afraid. "Good morning," Clara said, and sat down, and adjusted the carrier so that Miles was comfortable, and opened her folder. The room was very quiet. Whatever this meeting was supposed to be, a clean transfer of documents, a final accounting, a civilized ending, it was no longer going to be that. The silence in the conference room lasted exactly 4 seconds. Clara counted them without meaning to. It was a habit she had developed during the last year of her marriage, filling empty spaces with numbers, because numbers were reliable in a way that words had stopped being. Hargrove broke it first, the way experienced lawyers always do, by clearing his throat and opening a folder with the practiced neutrality of someone who has witnessed far stranger things than this, and would not be giving anyone the satisfaction of a reaction. "Now that everyone is present," he said, "we can begin reviewing the proposed settlement terms." Derek hadn't moved. His phone was still in his hand, screen dark now, forgotten. His eyes had traveled from Miles to Clara's face and back again, doing a kind of silent arithmetic that Clara recognized. She had done the same calculation herself months ago, alone in her bathroom with a calendar on her phone and a feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. "Philip." Derek's lawyer leaned over and said something quietly into Derek's ear. Derek didn't respond. It was Renata who spoke first, which surprised everyone in the room, including, it seemed, Renata herself. "Is that—" she started, then stopped. She looked at Derek. Derek. He turned to her slowly, and for the first time in the interaction, Renata Collins looked uncertain. She was a beautiful woman in the precise, assembled way of someone who has spent considerable energy on the project. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent.